hail from Los Angeles, California, a member of the Pacific group there. And thank you, Ryan. Thank you for the invitation to this good meeting. I like your name, the Morning After Group. That's so lovely. Takes me back 51 years. This program's kept me sober for over 51 years. And yet I could still remember those mornings after. And I just think with horror about encounter with toothbrush. When I tried to brush my teeth, it would cause such gagging that I couldn't get it done. And I'm glad life's not like that now. Speaking of toothbrushes, reminds me of my really first drink that I remember. And that was when I was a fairly small child, maybe 8 or 9 years old. And I had a toothache. And this was way back in ancient history. I mean, normally a mom would take a child to the dentist with such a problem, but my mother had a different solution, and that was scotch. And she filled a little cotton ball with scotch and told me to put it on my tooth. And oh my gosh, I sucked that cotton ball dry and then asked for a refill. And that was delicious. And she left the bottle of scotch by my bed. So I really had a good time with my toothache that night. Now, it was funny. It never occurred to me to look for more bottles or do that until I was, I think, about 20 years old. And that's when alcohol came into my life in the way of medicine. In other words, to maintain that state that I needed to be in just to stay on planet Earth. And when I was in my 20s, I was getting to that point in life where I thought I'd be a happy person. I'd wanted to be a scientist, maybe even a Nobel Prize winning scientist, but at least a scientist. And by that time, I was somewhat of a scientist. I was working on a research project at UCLA. And I was had a white lab coat and lots of reagents. I was married to a scientist by that time, and Bill was a physicist. I was a biologist. And I just thought that if only I could get to that place in life, then that would be happiness. I had always had problems talking to other people, but I thought if I could just learn that mystical language of science, at least I could talk to scientists. And Bill and I could talk to each other. And I knew that the first time I met him because I'd gone to work in his lab. And he went away to a meeting in Washington and sent me a postcard. And I read it, and it said, "Dear Marilyn, I was thinking about what you were saying, but all I can come up with is," and he wrote out this beautiful, elegant partial differential equation. And I just thought, oh my gosh, no man ever talked to me like that before. And I was in love. And that was the beginning. So again, it would seem that would bring about a kind of joy and happiness. But it just didn't. I was that kind of person that I'd get something that I so desired, and then after a short while, no, that's not quite it. And so I was getting to the end of all of those things that I wanted, knowing that would make me happy, and still wasn't happy. And then I was rescued. As I said, I was in my 20s. I was in a laboratory. And right there on the shelf is this wonderful reagent, this great chemical in a bottle, 90% ethanol. And that's like 180 proof vodka. That is quite a drink. And it was right there, available in the lab, an endless supply of it. When we were getting low, we'd just order more. Now, it had a federal seal, and it said to be used for research purposes only. So we used it for a study called The Effects of This Stuff, Ethanol, on the Human Personality, and just drank away. And then at night, we'd go out to bars. And that was wonderful until that day when the director asked me that question that he asks so often. He'd come by and he'd say, "How's your research going?" And I would say, "Just fine." And he would leave me alone. one day he came by and said, "How's your research going?" And this was after a couple of years of enjoying that lab alcohol and trips to bars. "How's your research going?" And I said, "Just fine." And he said, "Good. It's time to write it all up. And I want you to give a talk next week at our lab meeting. And then it's time to publish. And let's just get it written up." And I said, "Well, it's not quite finished." And he said, "Well, write up what you have." And that was the kiss of death. I mean, I looked at my lab book and I had drawn some pictures of the lab mice and I had written a few limericks. There was an old man from Nantucket, but it just was not going to fly as a research project. So what do I do? Well, I went home and very quickly gave birth to 2 little children. Now, I don't know how that was happening, but I had lost control of my life. I was in despair. I was drinking all the time. And I felt a lot of guilt later on in the program about just being, at best, an absentee mom. It was so bad that one night I was out driving to get more to drink, and what I remember is somehow the car had stopped, helped by, I think, a telephone pole, and Bill was opening the front door, and he said, "I came home from my lab and the front door was wide open. You've got children in the car. There's no seatbelt. What is wrong with you?" And I thought, something is wrong, but I didn't know what it was. I couldn't answer. And shortly after that, he moved his mother in, and she took control of the situation and scared me to death with her encouragement. She knew about Alcoholics Anonymous, and she would encourage me with, "Unless you get control of your life, we're going to lock you up and you'll never see the children again." And I just thought, how dare that old witch, or something that rhymes with it, talk to me like that? I mean, this is right here in my own garage. Well, that was because I took solace in the garage and sat there and drank all the time. But I thought, maybe she'll go home if I go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went first to the program, January 1969, but that's not my sobriety date. I went not for myself, not to get sober, although it kept me sober while I was going to meetings. It was to get mother-in-law to go back home and leave me alone. And that worked. She went home and I went home. I went home from Alcoholics Anonymous and very soon tapered back on and had 2 or 3 years of depraved drinking. Very quickly after that, she moved back in along with my mother. They would alternate. And there was just one thing I had remembered from 1969. I'd been taken to some kind of a group, and there was a person there, the wonderful Marion W. And I saw her from afar, and she, in the language that we learn in Alcoholics Anonymous, she had what I wanted. She had a bunch of friends. She had self-respect. She had a sense of purpose. She had a good sense of humor. People loved her. And I never went over to say hello. I was kind of waiting for her to come to me, which she didn't. And so I never got acquainted, but I remembered her. So in February 8th, 1972, I called central office out of desperation. Those morning after times were so dreadful and so scary. One morning I just called AA, and they sent somebody to my house, a 12-step worker. And that was the wonderful Lorena, who is sober to this day up in Ojai, California. And she said she would take me to a meeting. And I didn't want to go. But on the other hand, I was hopeless at that point, absolutely hopeless. And there is page 27 in our big book, that discussion of Roland Hazard and Carl Jung. And Bill Wilson, in his letter to Carl Jung in 1961, kind of gave that moment, that time, and Carl Jung credit for the idea that started Alcoholics Anonymous because it involved hopelessness. Roland was hopeless, and he needed to make a surrender to a higher power, which Carl Jung felt that he couldn't do. A hopeless alcoholic, rarely do we see this happen with alcoholics of your type. Surrender was needed. And then a conversion experience, turning will and life over to higher power and undergoing a conversion. And that conversion experience, as Bill Wilson realized, amounts to lasting sobriety, but also this thirst for alcohol somehow gets converted into a thirst for Alcoholics Anonymous, a thirst to carry the message and tell other people about it. Now, how that happens, it's mystical. Of course it is, because it involves higher power, which we can never, ever understand. We just know it's there by all the evidence, its effect on us, keeping us sober day after day. And so I was at that point of hopelessness. My sponsor gave me something wonderful, a white flag, and I feel like I can do this all by myself. I just have that in plain view, and that reminds me that I am entirely dependent on my higher power and the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And with that hopelessness, I did make that surrender. I'll go to the meeting with you. I said I'd like to find Marion, but my 12th stepper, Lorena, didn't know Marion, that wonderful goddess of sobriety I'd seen with my first visit. But she took me to a meeting, and at that dark, quiet meeting she took me to, after the coffee break, the leader got up and said, "Our main speaker tonight is Marion." Oh my gosh, what kind of a coincidence is that? Out of the hundreds at that time, 1972, hundreds, maybe 1,000 meetings in the greater LA area, hundreds and hundreds of speakers, that Marion would be the speaker. The one person I wanted to meet would be that main speaker. I don't know how that happened, but because it happened, that was the beginning of a real surrender for me in two kinds of ways. One was just a surrender in awe to some kind of mystery, some kind of power here that I didn't understand, but I knew that it was something strange and wonderful. And the second way was that I heard Marion's talk in my deep alcoholic fog. She told my story. And after the meeting, I ran up and asked her to be my sponsor, and she agreed to do that if I would go to her home group, a big active group in West LA, the Pacific Group, which is my home group to this day. And I agreed to do that because by that time, in my sick dependency, I had attached to myself, to Marion, just talons right in, don't ever go away. And that saved my life. That was the real surrender. I came into the program thinking I was a scientist. And with that, I thought I was an atheist because science can explain everything. And what is this hokey thing that people call God? I mean, you can't do experiments on it. You can't measure it. You can't talk to it. You can't see it. It doesn't exist. We know that from science. So I was scornful and arrogant, and I was an atheist. But the surrender was fine because I surrendered my will and my life over to the care of my sponsor, my wonderful sponsor. And that was sufficient. It was a while before the conversion experience occurred, though, changing my whole personality. As Carl Jung described in our big book, it amounts to deep emotional displacements and rearrangements. Old concepts are swept away, replaced by new ones. And that happens, of course, through the sanding down process of the fellowship, just getting all those rough edges of arrogance sanded off, but mainly because of these steps that we take, where we have to confront ourselves and all of our character defects, the people we've harmed and begin to make it right. And because of that, by the time I got to steps 10, 11, 12, I had had that promise, spiritual awakening, which for me amounted to a veil parting. It was, oh my gosh, you've been there all along, haven't you? I see you in everything. Thank you. And that has changed. That changed my life because now I knew that the earth was solid and there was something more powerful than myself. That, as our second tradition says, a loving God as he expresses himself in our group conscience. And I believe that's more than just business meeting where we all vote. We call that a group conscience vote. I believe that this higher power exists in our fellowship because this higher power seems to love alcoholics, want us to get sober and stay sober and carry the message to one another. And it is astonishing. It really is what happens here. I heard talk after talk where there is that point of departure where you just can't get there from where we are. I was out in my garage much of the time, and I live in the world now, and I am a responsible citizen.
Excuse me, Marilyn, five minutes to go, please. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. And that is expressed so beautifully in a Mary Oliver poem, very short poem. It is, pay attention, be amazed, tell about it. And I think that's what we do here. Once we are given the ability to pay attention and just understand that, oh my gosh, the miraculous is happening. It caused me to be astonished, to be completely amazed. And now this desire to stay drunk all the time is converted to this thirst for Alcoholics Anonymous. It's been many, many years since my last drink, but I am probably more excited about Alcoholics Anonymous than ever. I love it, and I'm very active in the fellowship. It has carried me through good times and bad. 11 years ago, I just was riding high, and I thought, this is a beautiful life. By that time, there were 3 children, and they had grown up, and they had beautiful lives. I had a job. My husband was well and had a job. And we were still involved in science, and that was wonderful. And now everything was beautiful and good. And I was speaking out of town in Las Vegas. And before the evening was out, we learned that our son had taken his own life, had committed suicide in his office one Friday night. And I thought my world had come to an end. But I had a strong sponsor, no longer Marion, but now a fellow named Clancy I in the Pacific Group, very strong sponsor. And he said, go home and take care of your family. You have 40 years of sobriety, and you will be the strong one. And he was absolutely right. As I said, I thought my world had come to an end, but in one way, it was just a new beginning. There were 2 bad years of grief for all of us in the family. But because of the strength of the program, I was able to be that strong one for them. And emerged from that with a story to tell. And there are people that go through that kind of thing all the time. And I'm able to say, come into this circle. It is safe. You will survive. I kind of thought that it's all over, but it was really just a new beginning. In that time, I began to get more active than ever. I was elected president of a lifelong learning institute where I was teaching science, and that was a good distraction. And also in the fellowship, I was sponsoring ever more people, and that was always a wonderful distraction. But what happened was that 3 years ago, my husband, who was older than I, passed away. And I realized that I had a resilience now, that I realized that death is just a transition. As Bill Wilson said, we are safe in the here and the hereafter. And Bill, on the way out, told me he would wait for me on the other side. He had his own conversion experience. And in the years that followed, Clancy, my sponsor, passed away, and kind of the matriarch of our group passed away. And I thought, what am I going to do without a sponsor? Well, very quickly after that, I found a new sponsor, the wonderful Tom W. in Oakland, who I have followed for many years because he gives great retreats, sober a long, long time, and a wonderful member of the fellowship. And I began to sponsor people who were left as orphans in the loss of Clancy. And so I've been drawn by sponsorship and the pandemic that unites us in the whole world into other groups. Because of my sponsees, I go to their meetings too. And now I have about 4 communities that I regard as my home group. And that has been such a blessing because I was kind of insular in the Pacific group. As many Pacific group members feel, this is the only way to do it. And if you don't do it this way, you can't stay sober. Shape up. Well, I was so wrong. There are many ways of doing Alcoholics Anonymous. And I see that happening, and they're keeping people sober all over, and they're different. And it's been such a privilege to sample these up close and personal. So I'm a member of about 4 different communities now, and that is really, really wonderful. And through friends in Alcoholics Anonymous, even though I am old, I am still spry. A year ago, we went to Egypt for 2 weeks and saw AA there too. And that was pretty thrilling. We also rode camels and explored pyramids. And now, because of the pandemic, we have an outreach to Japan. They've even formed the Tokyo Pacific Group, and there's going to be a wonderful talk today by Debbie D. at the Tokyo Pacific Group.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you again, Marilyn. Love to hear you. The rest, we're pretty much out of time. Thank you. Again, I apologize.
Just to say, so I spent 2 weeks in Japan and got to see the Pacific Group. So life is good. And you said to select a topic. I think I would like to select surrender. What does that mean to you? Thank you.